Greetings, Brookings Bio students. This is Mrs. Rydell, and in this installment we're going to finish up looking at some of those threats to biodiversity. And one of the threats that we're facing right now has to do with apparently harmless plants or animals that humans transport and move into a new place. And it's called invasive species. When you invade, you kind of move in and take over. And sometimes these are, we would think, apparently harmless organisms that wouldn't cause any problems in their own ecosystems. Remember, ecosystems have all those interconnections, and there's predators to control prey and all kinds of interactions to maintain the balance in an ecosystem. And if you move a new species into a place that never was there before, a lot of times there aren't predators there to help control them, no diseases or parasites to keep that population under control. And oftentimes if you bring in a new species from somewhere else, they take off, the populations increase and move into a new place and kind of push out the native species that live there and have a serious impact. So example, Australia originally did not have rabbits living on that continent. There weren't any bunny rabbits, and we have rabbits here. We think of them kind of cute, furry little organisms. We don't really think of them as major pests, but they came to be a major pest in Australia because they were brought in and kind of took over the continent. There was a man who moved to Australia from Germany, and one of the favorite foods he liked to eat was rabbit stew, and so he decided to bring some rabbits from home back in Germany over to Australia and let them loose on his farm so he could go out occasionally and shoot a rabbit and have rabbit stew. So he brought in 24 rabbits and he turned them loose in the late 1800s. And those rabbits reproduced rapidly because there were no predators to keep them under control. They pretty much took over the continent of Australia. Within 10 years, they had reproduced so quickly, they were killing 2 million rabbits a year and trapping them, and it didn't even seem to make a dent in the population. There were huge, huge numbers of rabbits. And if you think about what rabbits eat grass, rabbits eat plants. And what they did was huge damage to the ecosystems. They would move into a place, they would eat all the vegetation, and if you don't have vegetation to hold the soil in place, you have serious erosion problems. The introduction of rabbits to Australia is believed to be responsible for the extinction of 1/8 of the mammal species that lived on that continent. Unknown numbers of plant species, serious erosion problems. It's still a major problem. They hate rabbits in Australia. This little no rabbit symbol came off of a website, an Australian website, and they're still trying to figure out ways to get rid of their rabbit problem. Even going as far as maybe bringing in rabbit diseases, some kind of bunny plague to take out all the rabbits there. An example of an invasive species we have in South Dakota is this little clam. It's a zebra mussel. You can see the stripes where the zebra name came from. It's a tiny little, small little clam, and native to Asia. They thought these were brought over on boats, transported on boats. If you have a boat in the water, these will stick to the boat. They get into the ballast water, and then they get transported when the boat moves to the next lake, the next river. They hop off like little hitchhikers and get into a new ecosystem. First discovered in 1988, and they have rapidly spread from the East Coast up the water supplies all through the Great Lakes and the waterways, and they just keep moving as people move them on their boats and move from one lake to the next. They get introduced into a new place, and we have these now in South Dakota. They've spread all across the United States. You wouldn't think a little clam would cause that much of a problem, but serious damage to ecosystems. A lot of places get their water from lakes or rivers, and these things, when they take over and the population takes off, they clog up power plant and water intake pipes, cost millions of dollars. They damage boat engines. When they die, they blanket the shorelines with their shells, consume food for other native species and push them out. They threaten water activities, recreational activities. If you take a boat to put into a lake in South Dakota, oftentimes you'll see these "don't pick up hitchhiker" signs, "stop the zebra mussel," and we're trying to keep them from spreading farther from one lake to the next. Another example of an invasive species in South Dakota is the leafy spurge. It's a little plant and came from Europe and Asia. First showed up in the 1800s in Massachusetts on the East Coast, and since that time has spread across the country. It's a little plant, small grassy plant, grows in prairies and grassy areas, has these little yellow flowers, and it has spread across the plains now into South Dakota. This is a serious problem here. It's one of our most threats to our native grassland plants. It crowds out the native grasses, damages grazing land for cattle, ecosystems. This little plant moves into the ecosystem and basically takes over, crowds out the native species. Over 300,000 acres in South Dakota are infested with leafy spurge. According to the Department of Agriculture, these infestations, they're costing big money. The farmers have to spray to try and get rid of this stuff. Cost the producers and taxpayers millions of dollars in lost production, trying to control this and other impacts. This is a serious threat to our grassland ecosystems. Okay, we're continuing down that list now. Remember our original list of things that humans do that impact ecosystems and ultimately cause threats to biodiversity. And one of the other things we put on the list was pollution. A pollutant is any harmful substance that can enter the biosphere. It could be land pollution, air pollution, water pollution. The main air pollution problem that we're dealing with is something called smog. It's a mixture of chemicals. You see that haze, that kind of a smoky fog over that's where the name comes from, smoke and fog together, it makes smog. And it's coming from most serious areas where we have a lot of smoggy air pollution come from cities where we have lots of automobiles and factories, and the cause of this is really burning fossil fuels. A lot of cities, they have this hazy cloud that sits over the city, and because of all the pollution there, sometimes you can't even see the buildings. China has a serious air pollution problem in many of their big cities. People go around wearing masks. You can't even see a block away on the street because the smog that is so heavy. The reason we have smog, the reason we have air pollution, the main cause is burning fossil fuels. Releasing pollutants into the air causes problems. Those chemicals that come from burning fossil fuels cause breathing problems for people, especially if you are compromised already, you have asthma. A lot of big cities have smog alerts where, don't go outside today because the smog levels are so high. You can't breathe. It's bad for us. Another example of a pollution that has gotten into the land and into the water is a chemical called DDT. And remember we talked about the idea of green revolution, and we came up with these new inventions to help farmers grow more food. And one of the things that was invented back then were farming chemicals, pesticides and fertilizers. This was one of the first modern insecticides. It killed insects, killed bugs. It was cheap, stayed active for a long time, killed lots of different insects. Once it got out into the ecosystem, it lasted a long time and didn't break down. And we use it to control agricultural pests, and especially mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are a pest. They can bother people. It's hard to be outside in the summer sometimes here in South Dakota because of the mosquitoes. They can carry diseases, and so people were very excited and happy that we kind of finally came up with a way to control the mosquitoes. And we still spray for mosquitoes here in the summertime. The fog trucks come through. We don't spray DDT anymore, but we are still trying to control mosquitoes because of this disease carrying issue. So we're spraying the DDT. Runoff carries it into the rivers, into the streams, and puts it into the ecosystem. And once it's in the ecosystem, it's going to get into the food chain. If it's in the water, the plants pick it up. If the plants have it, then the fish that eat the plants are going to pick it up. And if the fish have it, then the birds, the higher trophic level consumers, are going to pick it up from the fish. And it passes through the food chains. And the problem with DDT is it doesn't break down very easily. Just like I said, it lasts a really long time. And this is, remember we talked about the idea of phobic and philic. This is a very hydrophobic molecule. It doesn't like water, and it concentrates in the tissues, especially in the fat of animals, and it doesn't degrade. It stays in their bodies. So it leads to something called biological magnification. This is a vocab word. And what happens is, as it's passing through the food chains, it seems to concentrate, get more concentrated as it passes from organism to organism. As it moves from one level to the next trophic level, the amount of this chemical gets more and more and more. So the plants pick it up from the water. There's a little bit of DDT at the plant, and now our fish comes along. The fish doesn't just eat one plant with a little DDT. It eats lots of plants with a little DDT, and that makes the fish have even more in their bodies. And so now the fish have some. Each fish has some DDT, but the birds are going to eat not just one fish, but lots of fish. So now the bird is going to have an even greater concentration. And as we move up the food chain, the organisms that are at the highest levels are going to be the ones that are getting the most concentration. This doesn't just work for DDT, it works for any chemical that gets into the food chain and passes along through those trophic levels. So remember, it's kind of like a pyramid, and you have large numbers at the bottom with a little bit of chemical, and as you pass up the food chain, we have fewer organisms. Remember, it's kind of like a pyramid. The bottom has to support the life on top, but as the chemical passes through the food chain, it gets more and more and more concentrated. So those organisms at the top concentrate a lot of chemical in their body, and it causes some health issues for them. Especially, this seemed to be a problem for those higher fish-eating birds, eagles, osprey, pelicans. And what happened was we started seeing declines in these bird populations. And when scientists looked at it, it seemed what was happening was the DDT in the bird's body seemed to interfere with their ability to put calcium into the eggs when they laid eggs. The shell, calcium is what makes the shell hard, just like it makes your teeth hard, makes your bones hard. And if you put calcium in the shells of eggs, it makes them sturdy. And if there's not enough calcium, what would happen would the bird would lay the eggs, they would sit on the eggs, and they would break. And that means no baby birds that year. And so we weren't hatching babies, the older ones were dying, and the population numbers were going down. American bald eagle was declared in danger in 1967. Since that time, we've kind of figured this out. We've stopped spraying DDT. The eagles have come back, but I think right now they are considered threatened. The numbers still aren't back to what they were. So this is happening in like the 1960s. There was a woman biologist, her name is Rachel Carson. She was a scientist, and she wrote a book about the effects of DDT and some of these chemicals that we were putting out into the ecosystem and how they could be harmful to organisms. And the book was called Silent Spring, and the name comes from the idea about, think about, how do we know that it's spring? One of the first signs of spring, the robins come back, after the long winter, and one of the first signs of spring is finally here is we hear the birds singing. And what would happen if we took out all of our birds? What if all of our birds went extinct because of these effects of all these chemicals? And so that's where the name silent. What if the spring was silent and we didn't hear the birds? And that book was kind of an impetus, a beginning to start looking at what are we doing to our ecosystems, and kind of led to the banning of DDT. We don't use DDT anymore in the United States. I think there are still some countries that do, but in the US it has been banned since the 1970s, and it was kind of the beginning of the birth of the ecology movement and Earth Day, and thinking about our planet, the environmental movement, the green movement, the beginning of a lot of environmental organizations, and really getting people thinking about, you know, we're impacting the planet, and what are we doing? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, remember I said let's focus on the good things. What can we do? Because there are things that we can do. One of the ways to impact air pollution is using smokestack scrubbers. We have the technology to do that. These are things that are put onto smokestacks to catch the pollution, not let it out into the air. The reason that we don't use them is they're expensive, and sometimes companies think of the bottom dollar of where am I going to make the most money and for my products, and using less money to put into making the product makes them more money, and so we need to kind of change our thinking about what's important, and you know, maybe spending a little bit more on things. If we can make the planet a little safer, that might be the way to go. We have auto emission standards. Your car can only put out so much pollution. We have clean air regulations that say how much pollution different companies can put in. And these were put in started in the 1960s for clean air, clean water came a little later. Richard Nixon was president when some of these regulations went into effect. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, was created. That's the part of our government whose job it is to control pollution in our air, in our water. They make regulations, they monitor, check businesses for their pollution they're putting out, and they can fine people and if they're putting out too much pollution. Auto emission standards, how much gunk. A lot of the air pollution is coming from burning fossil fuels and driving cars. In many states, if they have, especially ones with serious air pollution problems, you can't get a license plate for your car without taking it to a station, and they plug a little hose on the back of your tailpipe and they check to see how much pollution it's putting out. And you have to be under a certain level of air pollution, or you don't get a license plate for your car. We have to figure out a way to cut down on burning fossil fuels. That's the major source of air pollution in the United States. And we need to look at other kinds of energy, and we are doing that, looking at electric cars, looking at even solar and fuel cells and all kinds of things. We need to cut back on the fossil fuels. Water pollution is also a serious problem. We talked about the idea of using fresh water. We're using that resource up faster than the water cycle is creating it, replacing it, and we use water for everything: drinking, washing, cooking, watering our crops. Humans, Americans, use billions of gallons of fresh water every day to do the things that we need, and we need to think about if we are using it up faster than it's being replaced, how can we keep our water from being polluted and keep it so that we have it when we need it and not waste it. And that leads us to something about what we call invisible or hidden water. And a lot of times we see the water that we're using, but there's a lot of water that goes into making products that we don't see. We don't even know that the water was used to make that. And so if you think about, growing crops uses water. Even farming takes a lot of water. We talked about that. But even other things that we don't think of is a shirt, blue jeans, a pair of blue jeans uses almost 11,000 liters of water. To make a car, the costs of building all the parts, mining for things, all of these things take water to build all these conveniences that we have. The things that we have, it takes water to build them. So we're going to watch a couple little videos here. Okay, so we need to start thinking about how water is used on the planet, and what are the things that we are making have to do with using up some of that fresh water. So what do we do about this? How do we help? How do we conserve water? We need to think about ways that we can use less water, or do things in ways that use less water. We need to protect those wetlands and the forests that hold the water in place, that clean the water for us. That's part of keeping the water cycling on our planet. We have water treatment plants to clean water. Clean water regulations. These went in place back in the, like I said, early, like 1970, when Richard Nixon was president. We had some serious environmental issues. In fact, there was a river in Ohio, the Cuyahoga, that actually caught on fire because of it. It was so polluted. And it kind of led to this idea of let's make some rules to protect our environment. And we've kind of done that over the years. It kind of goes in cycles. As we have a serious environmental issue, an oil spill or a nuclear meltdown at a power plant, and everyone kind of gets excited about the environment and looks, what are we doing to damage our planet, and let's do something. And then the excitement kind of goes away, and it kind of cycles like that. It takes an important event to kind of set people off and get us thinking about this, and then we kind of get complacent again. And right now we're kind of in our leaders in our country are kind of in the complacent, like, we don't want to talk about this stuff, we don't want to think about this stuff. We need to change that, because the issues are there. The impact we're having on the planet is there, and we need to look at how are we going to make this planet available for future generations. Okay, so ways to conserve water. There's lots of things that we do that waste water. We don't even think about it. Just turn on the tap and out comes the water as much as we want. We don't think about where it comes from. But there's things that we can do to decrease water use. Even something simple like when you water your lawn, don't water it in the hot part of the day when the sun's going to evaporate that water. We water in the evening when it's cooler. Take shorter showers. Newer toilets. We have these low flush toilets now that use less water when they flush. And the olden toilets that we have, if you have an older house with a toilet that's not a low flush toilet, a simple thing you can do is to put a brick or 2 bricks in your tank here, and so when the tank fills, it doesn't fill with as much water, doesn't flush with as much water when it's something very simple. We have things that can go on our faucets, our showers, to control the amount of water coming. You guys are going to be consumers in the future, looking for appliances, washing machines and dishwashers that are what we call Energy Star. They have a label that tells you how energy efficient it is, how is it good for the environment, how eco-friendly it is. And in buying those devices that are going to be water savers and energy savers, that's important. Even something simple as turning off the water when you're brushing your teeth. A lot of people turn the faucet on, get out the toothbrush, put the toothpaste on, brush your teeth. All the time that water is just running down the drain. It's being wasted. And there's lots of little things that we can do to conserve the water that we're using. So the big question is, how can we do this? How can we, if we know that the things humans are doing affect those renewable resources, like our land, our air, our fresh water, our forests, how can we provide for our needs, the things that we want, the things that we build, our comforts that we have, having water, having clean air, having the things that we want to live, without using up all of our resources? And it leads to this idea of sustainability, sustainable development. Sustain means to keep it going, keep it continuing. We don't want to use up all of our resources. We need to use other resources without using them up. We need to provide for the things that we need without causing long-term environmental harm. And that's the big question. How are we going to do that? We need to, like the video said, change the way we think about a lot of things and the way we do things. And unless we make a conscious effort to do that, things are not going to change. Okay, so let's talk about the idea of conserving biodiversity. That wise use of natural resources is called conservation. And the root word of that is conserve, to protect and save the resources on our planet. And if we think about saving endangered species, protecting, if we want to save the polar bears, save the penguins, save the tigers, we need to really understand how ecosystems work. We need information about how those interactions happen and how ecosystems work together to maintain the balance. If we can't save a tiger unless we save the place where it lives, we have to understand habitat interactions and ecosystems in order to make this happen. So we need more information, we need more research. Today, if you look at all of the places where we have endangered organisms, where we have pollution, where we have bad things going on in the ecosystem, if we could magically come up with a plan to do this and have all kinds of money to fix everything, that would really be wonderful. But the reality is that there is so much damage. There's so many places that have endangered species. There's so many areas that need help. There is not enough money in the world to fix this. And so what scientists have done is kind of focus in on where are some areas where serious damage to the ecosystem, where with serious endangerment of organisms that live there, and where can we put our money that's going to do the most good. If we can't fix everything, are there some special places we could focus that money to do the most good and save the most species? And we call those hotspots, biological hotspots. And these are places where organisms are most endangered, and if we have a limited amount of money, that's where we need to focus and put that money to best use. We need to look at our idea of building cities. We have more and more science. Remember we said 7 billion people on our planet right now, and predicted another 2 billion in your lifetime. Where are we going to put all these people? We need to come up with a way to plan our cities to have less sprawl, less spreading out and taking over green places, and maybe need to think about how we design cities and where are we going to put all these people. We need to set aside land to keep our green spaces. We need research to understand the ecosystems and the interactions there. If we're going to help to save some of these species that are endangered, we need to really understand the whole system rather than just trying to save individual animals. And we need to put our money into those hotspots, maximize the results for the money that we spend. We can't fix everything at this point. And where is the money going to do the most good? That takes care of sections 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3 in your book. And we're going to talk about some of the really serious things we need to focus on in the future in our next part of our slideshow, which is section 6.4. Stay tuned for that.